Hello everyone, today I am making a tier list for the Peoria regionals coming up, and yeah, I'll be explaining my thoughts on why each deck is higher or lower, and if you'd like even more coverage on this, including my personal deck lists that I would play for each of the top archetypes, you can check that out over on Metafy, exclusively available to Metafy members. But the tier list today is available for everyone, so let's get into it. Giratina VSTAR Lost Zone is definitely going to be in the top tier. This deck is very resilient to meta shifts because there's really nothing that counters it. Giratina V has Shred, Giratina V Star can either do 280 or just pop a Pokemon with Star Requiem. Lost Abyss kind of like soft counters, or Abyss Seeking, I'm sorry, kind of soft counters Klefki if anybody's trying to counter Comfey decks with Klefki. Abyss Seeking still lets you draw cards and gets things into the Lost Zone while your opponent's just stuck with a Klefki. Sableye places damage counters, so that gets around things. Radiant Greninja can do bench damage and take multiple knockouts at one time. Cramorant can attack for free, so any kind of control or energy denial type things, Cramorant does pretty well against. So Giratina V-Star Lost Zone, just all in all, is very resilient to meta shifts, like I said, because nothing fully counters it. It has a bunch of like 45 to 55 matchups, and I think it's a deck that anybody experienced with Giratina Lost Zone should feel pretty comfortable playing into Peoria because a lot of your games will be influenced by your own playing, your own piloting of the deck, and you won't really be losing anything just from your opponent flipping over the active that is favored against your deck. The only caveat to that is kind of the Lugia matchup, which is still pretty shaky for Giratina. But other than that, you're fine into just about anything. Now, Charizard EX has finally been making moves, and Giratina V-Star is kind of favored into Charizard EX decks. But of course, I think Charizard EX decks will be prepared for Giratina V-Star with Lost Vacuums and now the new Mew EX. Mew EX is pretty good against Giratina V-Star because it can copy Lost Impact, so definitely watch out for that. Next, Charizard EX. So Charizard EX, I feel very comfortable putting the Arvinzard variant that William Azevedo won the Curitiba regionals with. Charizard EX, Pidgeot EX with some other support going on. I think this is another really well-rounded deck, especially when we add in the 70 HP Charmanders. That's going to make it even better against Lost Zone decks because now they won't be able to knock out like two Charmanders or Charmander and a Mew or Charmander and a Pidgey with Lost Mine because it's 10 extra HP and that actually goes a long way against Sableye. And then the third deck up here is going to be Gardevoir EX. And essentially, I think all three of the decks I have in A tier are very, very well rounded and very prepared to play against just about anything if you understand your matchups and you have your list prepared correctly. And looking at the top three decks here, I don't think there's anything that is good into Giratina, Charizard, and Guardy. So I think these three are pretty comfortably at the top, and you can't really go wrong with choosing any of these three. I also wanted to mention that I think Charizard EX Lost Zone, I'm kind of just going to group that in with the Arvinzard up here. Very different decks, but I think they both have very similar potential. Although I definitely expect less people to be playing the Lost Zone version of Charizard EX. So because of that, it will probably be less popular, less successful, make less moves, but I do think it has maybe just a little less potential than Arvinzard. But the Lost Zone variant definitely has its own positives to offer because it has not only the massive Charizard EX, but has Cramorant and Sableye, and just the Lost Zone engine in general, which we know is very good. But you know, rare candy and the different energy types, playing a stage two, all of that in Lost Zone can make the variance a little uncomfortable. But I don't think the variance is any more volatile than playing something like Lost Zone Kyogre, which we know is can very possibly do well. Next is going to be Turbo Lost Zone Box. Turbo Lost Zone Box is in an interesting position So I've talked about this in articles and videos, but going into NAIC, I felt like Gardevoir had gone from being the best deck into being just kind of middling because so many decks were prepared for it. And then I felt the same thing about Giratina going into Pittsburgh. It was the best deck, but then everybody prepared for it, making it kind of not the best deck anymore. And then I think Turbo Lost Zone Box is in a similar position right now where on paper it could be the best deck, but everybody's kind of prepared for it. You know, Gardevoir has been prepared for a while now with Cresselia plus Iono. Giratina VSTAR has both hand disruption and switch cards. The Charizard decks are limiting their bench. They also don't have the Arceus Vs on their bench anymore, or even possible for an Arceus V getting Echo Horned onto the bench if they're not playing the Arceus V Star line anymore. Plus, they have the 70 HP Charmander going into this tournament from the 151 set. I think just there's a lot of little things that are going on that is bringing Turbo Lost Zone Box down a notch. Also, I think Lugia is pretty well positioned now, and we also have colorless Lugia getting some hype with the new Mew EX. And I think Mew VMAX is on the decline, which means Rapid Strike Urshifu is pretty safe to play, and the Turbo Lost Zone Box doesn't love an influx of Rapid Strike Urshifu around. So Turbo Lost Zone Box definitely a very, very strong deck still, but I don't think it's in the top tier for this tournament. Next is going to be Lugia V-Star, either single strike or colorless. The deck is just still good. I don't really have a lot to say about it. I'm not a fan of Lugia, but people are going to play it and it's going to do well. Rapid Strike Urshifu. It has a pretty good matchup spread. It's favored into Guardy. It's even-ish against Charizard and Lost Zone Giratina. Though, I mean, some people are going to claim that it's favored for either side, but I think they're close enough that it goes either way. But so we have very close matchups to Tina and Zard, and then we have favored matchups into Gardevoir and Turbo Lost Zone. And I think if you lump the Lost Zone Zard up here, that's another favored matchup for Urshifu, is the Lost Zone version of Zard. But I wouldn't go as far to say that the Arven Zard matchup is favored for Urshifu just yet. Of course, Lugia is unfavored for Rapid Strike Urshifu. So that's something to keep in mind, but I think Lugia is still where it was for Pittsburgh, but I think Mew VMAX is down. So instead of having both of those bad decks being right up there with Urshi, now we just, I'm sorry, both bad matchups being right up there with Urshi, now we just have Lugia up here, and Mew VMAX is going to be down a little bit more. Moving down to the next tier, I'm going to put Miraidon at the top of this one. Miraidon does get some new tools from 151. If you look at the winning list from Champions League Yokohama, they played Zapdos EX, also with a Hawlucha, and then the Mew EX. I'm not as sold on the Zapdos EX Hawlucha combination, but I do think Mew EX is very good. Miraidon has been having a pretty good season so far, also a good end of last season with its Worlds performances. But I really am expecting an uptick in both Urshifu and Charizard EX for Peoria, and those are both poor matchups for Miraidon, which is causing me to bring Miraidon down to the third tier or tier C. I don't like to get too caught up in the tier names because it doesn't really matter. All that matters is these three decks are above these three decks, and these three decks are above these decks. Next in tier C is going to be Lost Zone Kyogre. Similar reasoning for Turbo Lost Zone to Lost Zone Kyogre, but I don't think that in this tournament, the extra variants that you have to circumvent and worry about, and the extra skill that it takes to properly compose yourself to play Kyogre, and prepare the Kyogre turns for the late game. I don't think it's worth for this event. Um, your Lugia matchup is a little bit better than your Turbo Zone versus Lugia. Rapid Strike is still a poor matchup, but the Kyogre itself typically won't be doing much against Guardy or Zard. It can do something against Tina, but some Tinas still do run Manaphy. So yeah, if I was running the Turbo Zone core, I wouldn't be transitioning to the Kyogre version of the list. I would just be sticking to Turbo Lost Zone box. I don't think I would see the value for Kyogre for Peoria. Next, let's talk a little bit about Arceus decks. So, Arceus decks have fallen off in popularity, but I think if enough people were to play Arceus Giratina, or maybe even Arceus Gudra, I think the deck could be okay. Reason being, Judge is very, very good against all Lost Zone decks. If you play like 4 Judge and plan to play them early, that will be good against Turbo Lost Zone Charizard, and Giratina Lost Zone. I mean, honestly, there's not many decks that want to see their opponent play Judge on turn 1. So I think Arceus decks are the decks that take the most advantage of playing Judge plus Path early. There's also like the Arceus with Klefki plus Aerodactyl VSTAR that will go like Judge plus Klefki in the active, and that can be very devastating against a bunch of decks, even against Charizard because they play the Celebrations Mew, and decks that might be playing the new Mew EX won't be able to play or use the restart ability if you have Klefki in the active or Path to the Peak out. So I think we could see a resurgence of Judge-based Arceus V-Star decks, either that being Giratina V-Star or Gudra V-Star or Aerodactyl V-Star. Maybe we'll see a bit of a Alolan Vulpix tossed in there. But yeah, I personally think that Arceus could have a good week if enough people play it right. So we'll have to see. Next, we have Chien-Pao. I think if you're going to play Chien-Pao, just take the Canadian Chien-Pao list. Kieran Farah, I want to say, from Canada, started a YouTube channel, put up a really good video that's very comprehensive for Chien-Pao. Baxcalibur with Bibarel. Just play the list that they suggest because they know much more about Chien-Pao than I do. But yeah, Chien-Pao is just like fine. It's not great. It's not horrible. But it could have a good meta coming up because it is favored into Charizard. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Fusion Mew we'll put here in the C tier as well. And I'm also going to put the Palkia Chien-Pao deck here, which has done pretty well for itself. It got 2 top 16s at Champions League Yokohama, which was interesting to see. And then in the last tier before Rogue, we're going to put Lost Zone Gudra, DTE Mew, and Sablezard. I do not expect these decks to perform well in Peoria. Let me just break it down real quick how I see it. I think the A tier, the top 3 decks, I expect one of these to win Peoria Regionals, and I expect to see them all in top 8 and top 16. B tier, wouldn't be too surprised if one of them won the event, but I definitely expect the 3 above them to have more placements and a better chance at winning. C tier, I don't expect any of these to win the event, but I could see them popping into maybe top 8, but more likely in the top 16 to top 64 range, getting their placements. And then D tier, maybe these make day 2 and then they just don't do anything in day 2, or they don't even make day 2 and they have no success at all. I'm sorry, the Radiant Charizard represents Sablezard Lost Zone. I don't think I said that. And then these other decks, I didn't make this tier list, so we'll just toss United Wings, Control, Control Part 2, and Zorark into the Rogue tier, and these are either parts of decks that I've talked about or don't matter. So there is my tier list. And like I said, check out the link in the description or in the pinned comment. And if you become a Metafy member, I'm putting exclusive kind of part 2 bonus episodes of my tier list videos over there for members only, where I'm going to be talking even deeper about the metagame coming up for the tournament, and also sharing my deck lists and how I would play them, and some techs and things like that that I'm still considering. Thanks for watching. You can check out ways to support my channel and my sponsors, coupon codes, affiliate links, everything like that in the description down below. And don't forget to subscribe for more Pokemon TCG content. I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.